The ducks had wristbands. Neon orange, waterproof wristbands, the kind you see at music festivals or questionable boat parties. A teenage lifeguard with a clipboard was chasing a Canada goose to verify its day pass, while a chalkboard by the gate read, "Lake access denied, HOA members only, hydration subject to surcharge." By noon, the sign had changed to, "Lake access open, by appointment, water rights leased through Hollister Basin LLC." That was me. My name is Miles Rutledge. I bought a modest ranch on Alder Loop in a planned community called Hollister Basin, a cul-de-sac with tasteful mailboxes and weaponized friendliness. I work remote, drink coffee black, mow my lawn on Thursdays. My social battery lasts exactly 2 HOA newsletters. Enter the antagonist, Evelyn Hart, HOA president, a woman whose bob haircut could slice deli meat and whose clipboard bore more tabs than the Library of Congress. She waved to me the first week like a queen acknowledging a distant colony. I should have recognized that wave as a warning sign, the kind of greeting that says I'm watching you without actually saying the words out loud. Behind the back fence sat the community's pride. Larkspur Lake, a 30-acre puddle the color of tea where retirees fished and kids learned to cheat at Marco Polo. The sales brochure had promised deeded access. My deed said the same. Evelyn's eyes said over my cul-de-sac. The lake was beautiful in that manufactured suburban way, with a walking path lined with imported river stones and a dock that looked like it came from a catalog called Aspirational Waterfront Living. I'd imagined peaceful morning kayak sessions, maybe some weekend fishing. What I got instead was a masterclass in petty tyranny. The notes started mild. Friendly reminder. Your kayak, color regrettable lime, is an eyesore. Observation. Your lake gate latch is non-compliant with the spirit of tranquility. Concern. Duck feed is carb-heavy and causing bloat. I tried to ignore them at first, figuring Evelyn would eventually find someone else to micromanage. But the notes kept coming, each one more creative than the last. Then came the orange stickers. Access suspended, investigation pending slapped on my gate, my paddle, once on my dog. Evelyn formed a lake stewardship subcommittee that met at dawn like zealots. They installed a padlock on the community path and a camera aimed, purely coincidentally, at my yard. Strangers, her volunteers, kept counting my lawn chairs from the alley and whispering about unauthorized seating. One morning I caught 3 of them measuring the distance between my fence and the water's edge with a literal tape measure, taking notes like they were documenting a crime scene. When I asked for the bylaw that said she could restrict my deeded access, she smiled so hard you could hear enamel creak. "It's in the covenant's elastic clause," she said, a phrase that should only exist in yoga studios. 2 days later, I found a notice of fine for unapproved lakeside activity, which turned out to be me breathing within 30 yards of water. The fine was $250. For breathing. Evelyn escalated to theater. She called non-emergency police to report an agitated male attempting to breach a protected water feature, which made me sound like a beaver with priors. The officers arrived, saw my deed, and left with an apology and a recommendation for a good sandwich place. One of them even muttered something about HOA drama as they walked back to their cruiser. Evelyn, undeterred, held an emergency HOA meeting in the clubhouse. They voted without quorum, because of course, to temporarily privatize lake access to board-approved members only. She had a custom banner printed, Larkspur Lake, membership protected like it was a speakeasy for trout. The banner must have cost at least $300, which I found grimly amusing given that she'd just fined me for existing near water. I attended that meeting, sitting in the back row while Evelyn held court like a dictator at a podium. She presented a slideshow, titled Lake Security Enhancement Initiative. There were graphs. Pie charts showing alleged overuse by unauthorized parties, which was apparently me and anyone who looked at me. She proposed a lake access fee of $500 per year, conveniently excluding herself and her closest allies on the board. When I raised my hand to object, she told me I was out of order and threatened to have me removed for disrupting official HOA business. So I did what any conflict-averse homeowner with a petty streak and a spreadsheet would do. I called the county recorder, then the State Water Commission, then a grinning land attorney named Carson who smelled like litigation and peppermint. Carson had the kind of smile that suggested he'd been waiting his entire career for a case exactly like this. He pulled county records going back 40 years, traced the developer's corporate history, and discovered something beautiful. It turned out Larkspur Lake wasn't exactly community-owned. It was tax delinquent, sitting in a limbo corporation that had dissolved years ago when the developer migrated to the Bahamas for spiritual reasons. The water rights were separate, and the easements were creative in ways that made Carson actually laugh out loud in his office. The lake had been owned by Lakeview Properties LLC, which had failed to pay property taxes for 6 consecutive years. The county had placed a lien. Nobody had claimed it. Nobody had even noticed, because the HOA had just assumed they owned everything inside the community boundaries. They didn't. 3 signatures, a cashier's check that hurt, and a flurry of filings later, the corporate shell Hollister Basin LLC, my corporate shell, legally owned the lake, the dam, the spillway, the dock, and crucially, the appurtenant water rights. Carson filed everything on a Friday afternoon. By Monday morning, I had a stamped deed and a water rights certificate with my name on it. I installed a modest gate with a card reader and a friendly sign. Welcome. Public recreation permitted. See website for passes. Underneath, HOA agreements honored if legally valid, LOL. I also installed a proper donation box for optional duck feed, approved by the State Wildlife Agency. Evelyn stormed down in a visor, brandishing a binder like holy scripture. You can't monetize our lake, she hissed. Her face had gone the color of a fire engine. Your lake. I showed her the stamped deed and the state water certificate with my LLC's name printed in bureaucratic glory. I watched her eyes scan the document, then scan it again, then narrow into slits that could cut glass. Then I handed her the community water use schedule, which guaranteed every house free potable water fill-ups at the spigot on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and a non-resident fee for HOA entities that wanted to host events, rent cabanas, or say, install padlocks. The fee schedule was reasonable, I thought. $50 per event for the HOA, which was actually less than they'd been charging residents for their lake access program that had no legal basis. Within a week, families were paddling again. Teenagers were teaching geese to high-five for wristbands, optional, for the record. Meanwhile, the HOA's lake program suddenly had costs, permits, insurance, dock maintenance, that the HOA had been pretending were zero. I invoiced them at standard rates. The board treasurer sent a message with a single crying emoji. Evelyn retaliated by cutting the padlock off my gate at 5 a.m., filmed by her own stewardship camera. She apparently forgot that the cameras she'd installed to spy on me were now recording her committing property damage. She also redirected runoff from the HOA's flower beds into the lake without a permit, which the state environmental inspector, waved in by yours truly, described as an enthusiastic violation. The inspector was a patient man named Doug who'd seen everything in his 20-year career, but even he seemed impressed by the audacity. He took soil samples, water samples, and approximately 60 photographs. At the next HOA meeting, packed to the fire code with wet flip-flops, the inspector presented fines for unauthorized alterations, unlawful surveillance aimed onto private property, and this was the chef's kiss, tampering with a water control structure. That last one was a felony in our state if it endangered public water supply. Evelyn's face drained of color. The room had gone completely silent except for the hum of the air conditioning and someone's nervous cough. Evelyn tried to bluff. We'll appeal to the developer. The developer dissolved in 2019, the inspector said, sliding over copies. Also, Miss Hart, did you file your HOA's annual report last year? She had not. Which meant the HOA's corporate status had quietly lapsed. Which meant every letter she'd sent with threats in bold was just a very fancy chain email. The room made the sound of 50 people trying not to laugh. Someone in the back row actually applauded before catching themselves. The board voted to remove Evelyn as president, then as a board member, then, after someone heroically motioned for general tidiness, as a signatory on anything sharper than a butter knife. The vote was unanimous. Even her former allies had apparently decided she'd become a liability. The state imposed fines totaling $12,000 on the HOA for the environmental violations and improper water management. The county required the HOA to repay improper fees collected from residents over the past 3 years, which came to another $18,000. Evelyn, personally, was cited for property damage and unlawful surveillance, facing a fine of $3,500 and 60 hours of community service now assigned to refilling dog waste bag stations around the lake she once guarded like Fort Knox. Her face went the color of undercooked shrimp as the gavel came down. She stood there, mouth opening and closing like a goldfish, while her former board members avoided eye contact and studied their shoes with sudden fascination. Then she did something I didn't expect. She cried, right there in front of everyone, tears streaming down her face as she whispered, "But I was protecting the community."